Welcome to the Fantasy Formula One podcast. This is Paul, and today we're doing a deep dive into the numbers behind Fantasy Formula One, result from Bahrain, which is round one of 2024 season, and kind of what to expect as we head into Saudi Arabia. We covered a lot of this on the previous podcast, right? The recorded podcast where Ben was in the studio, and we talked very high level, but very functionally high level about the drivers, what they did, and then things like that. This is intended to be much more of a deep dive. So if you love listening to numbers, if you love the sort of over-the-shoulders, nitty-gritty, things to think about, or if you just didn't watch the races, if you're in a position like I was when I was in the military and deployed regular, I wasn't able to watch the races and things like that, but I really was like, man, just give me the information, give me the lap times, give me the numbers, and I can go ahead and figure it out without needing to watch. So that's kind of like what this is designed for. If you're looking to try and get the basic sort of what's going on, listen to the previous two episodes. If you're wanting to kind of get down to cite the sources and look at the numbers itself and make your own conclusion, then this is the episode for you. So we'll go and kick it off. This was the first race weekend, Bahrain, the first race weekend of the 2024 FIA Formula One Championship, which we all knew. The prices for each driver and the constructors, you have five drivers, two constructors, and it has to equal $100 million or less. You can't go over. Now, all of these values are like stocks. So as soon as you have a driver that starts doing really well, their value will increase. If you have a driver starts doing poorly, their value will decrease some. And so after 1 week, everybody either has, more than $100 million in spending power or less, but in order for that to be realized and for you to get that money, you have to, in quotes, sell the driver. So as soon as you have Max Verstappen, or you have somebody who, let's say, you have somebody who is worth $8 million, and then their value goes up by $500,000. Well, that's not just money in your coffers. You have to release that driver from your list, and then you get that $8.5 million to put into another driver or another constructor. So big key takeaways for the starting values this year is that Max Verstappen didn't go down. He was so heavily dominant, and if you didn't pay attention to F1 or you didn't play the fantasy F1 last year, Max Verstappen is like only one race last year wasn't won by either Max Verstappen or Red Bull. And Max Verstappen's on a win streak of like 18 or something right now. It's ridiculous. So his value didn't reset. So his value crept up from like 20 into the $30 million range. And at the end of last year, he was around 30. Start of this year, he's still at 30, while a lot of other drivers reset. And they did this because he was so dominant that Fantasy F1 in 2023 turned into this thing where it was you had to have Red Bull as your constructor, you had to have Max Verstappen on your team, and it was all about who else you got as drivers that made all the difference. And they tried to combat that this year by pricing out Max Verstappen so much that as soon as, like what we're seeing now, what it looks like at least, that Ferrari is doing well, now you could very easily have Max Verstappen have Red Bull, but both Ferraris together with their Ferrari constructor outplay them both. So that's the limit going into it. And also, for anybody returning from the 2023 season, Lando Norris, his value didn't reset to the 11 million or whatever it was before. He's starting out this year at 23 million. And Oscar Piastri, the second-year driver, his teammate, is starting out at 19 million. So they're putting a lot of money into this. And another way, if you listen to the other podcasts I had, is leading up to this year, I separated all the teams into three tiers. You had your tier one, which is your 20 million-ish and above, which was reserved for very few drivers. And you had a nice big middle of the pack, which was your 10 to 20 million. And then you had your 10 million and below, which is your more bottom tier drivers, the drivers that there's high risk, high reward. Well, this year, they basically eliminated that middle tier. You have Max Verstappen at 30 million, then Lando Norris at 23 million, Sergio Perez at 21 million, then Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, George Russell, Oscar Piastri are all like 19.4, 19.1 millions. Carlos Sainz is 18.8 million. And then it drops down to Fernando Alonso at 15.9, drops down to Lance Stroll at 11.2, drops down to Daniel Ricciardo at 8.9, and then Esteban Ocon at 8.3, Yuki Tsunoda 7.8, exactly, stuff like that, and so on. So they eliminated that middle tier. What that basically it means, you have to pick one of your top four teams. So you have Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes and McLaren, and you have to basically pick one of them because you can't get two. You can get the constructor and one driver from one, maybe another driver from two, but you can get both. You can get both. You can get two constructors, but it's not really two constructors with Red Bull and any drivers of significance. It's really weird. It's really rough. So if you have Max Verstappen, it basically prohibits you from getting any other strong drivers and another strong constructor besides Red Bull. And I've tried to get Max Verstappen, Red Bull Racing, and Mercedes, Max Verstappen, Red Bull Racing, and Ferrari, and it just doesn't work. The best you can do is Max Verstappen, Red Bull Racing, and Aston Martin. But Aston Martin only put up 20 points in the first round, where Red Bull Racing put up 89 and Ferrari put up like 70-something. So it's still not that great. Then you drop down to RB, Baby Red Bull, they put up 7 points. Yes. They put up less than 1/10. They put up like 8% of what Red Bull Racing put up, and they put up like 12 or 13% of what Ferrari put up. Now, and we'll talk about Red Bull Racing soon because there's nothing but upward mobility. I mean, Daniel Ricciardo is a multi Grand Prix winner, and Yuki Tsunoda had an 8.8 points per million last year. Like, they're doing fine, but the first race just wasn't stellar because what do you have, right? If you have 2 cars with Red Bull, 2 cars with Mercedes, 2 cars with Ferrari, 2 cars with McLaren, that's 8 of your top 10. So then you have Red Bull Racing and Aston Martin competing over the last 2 slots, and then everybody else is out of the points, in which case there goes a lot of your point gathering ability, especially for constructors. Since constructors, you get bonus for both drivers being in the top 10 and both drivers getting into Q2, Q3, so on. So that's sort of the state of it. That was the state of it going into Bahrain for the first round. So let's go and take a look at all those numbers and how it's sorted out. Well, we don't look at free practices. So I tried to correlate in the offseason. I tried to look at all the numbers from all the free practices in the 2023 season, do my own stats, and try and figure out what I could derive from free practices that could be an indicator for the race. And there was a few drivers that indicated they always do better in races than they do in practices, which is fair enough. But they weren't doing well in practices. So as soon as it's like, well, hey, did you know that Sergio Perez always does better in races than he does in practices? Oh, that's good. What position does he get in practices? 15th. Well, yeah, no kidding. A Red Bull Racing driver is going to do better than 15th in a race, and he's not. Anyway, so free practices are kind of out. If I ever figure out what I can derive from them, or if you know what you can derive from them, please go ahead and let me know. I am very happy to correct myself on that. But we'll go ahead and move right into qualifying. So for anybody who happens to be new to Fantasy Formula One or Formula One in general, here's basically how qualifying works. You have all 20 cars. So you get a set time on the track. I think for Q1 it's like 16 or 18 minutes or something like that. And they can do as many laps or a few laps as they want, but their fastest lap time is logged and recorded. And then at the very end of the session, the top 15 times move on to the next round. The bottom 5 times are permanent. They're done qualifying, and that is their position on the starting grid. Which for Bahrain, it was interesting because Max Verstappen at the very end of all the qualifying won the pole with his fastest single lap time was 1 minute 29 seconds and basically 0.2 of a second. 1/10, 1.7, like 0.179 seconds. So yeah, around 1/2 of a second. The slowest driver, Pierre Gasly, who came in 20th, his fastest lap time was 1 minute 30 seconds 0.9 of a second. Why do I say that? I say that if it's like a 3-kilometer track or whatever, of all these 20 cars, the entire field was 1.5 seconds apart from each other. Now, tenths of a second matter in the sport, hundredths matter, and even thousandths matter. But they were that close. So Pierre Gasly with Alpine, which is really bummer because Pierre Gasly had heavy expectations going in. Esteban Ocon, Logan Sargent, Zhou Guanyu, which again that was rough, and Valtteri Bottas. They all were dropped at the end of Q1. Good news from that is that Logan Sargent, who had a really rough time last year, he finished 18th. He qualified 18th, so above both of the Alpines. But the problem is that both of the Alpines admittedly had some issues, so that might have impacted Logan Sargent's performance. Round 2 of 15, right? So they do all the more races. Now the previous time doesn't matter. All that matters is what time they put on the track this time, right? So after the time period, Kevin Magnussen from Haas, Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda from Red Bull, Williams, Alex Albon from Williams Racing, and Lance Stroll from Aston Martin all were dropped at the end of Q2. And then the rest moved on to Q3, where they do their fastest lap again, and that is the 1 through 10 starting grid. So 10th place on the grid ended up being Nico Hülkenberg from Haas. Lewis Hamilton was 9th from Mercedes. Oscar Piastri of McLaren was 8th. Lando Norris with McLaren was 7th. Fernando Alonso, the two-time world champion with Aston Martin, is 6th. Sergio Perez from Red Bull Racing is P5. And that was good because he's able to pass more people, and the more people you pass, the more points you get. So never, ever be afraid of Red Bull not being on the pole from qualifying, because that ends up working out really well for the fantasy players. Carlos Sainz was 4th in his Ferrari. George Russell in Mercedes at 3rd. Charles Leclerc from Ferrari qualified P2, and then Max Verstappen once again on the pole. No DNFs during qualifying, which was great. And there's the starting grid. The fastest lap for the entire race ended up being Max Verstappen with a time of 1 minute, 32 seconds, and 0.6 of a second, or 132.6. And so anybody out there is going, well, wait a second, that's, substantially, that's a whole second and a half, or almost 2 seconds off of his fastest single lap pace in Q2. And the answer is yes, it is. And why do they go faster in qualifying than they do on the track? Well, there's a number of reasons, not the least of which is on qualifying, they're just setting up to do one lap. They don't care about the second or third lap down the way. In racing, on the actual race, they really do care about, they don't want to burn up the tires now and not be able to use them later. They also have more fuel because in qualifying, they literally time it so, hey, you have enough gas for 3 laps, and don't try and do a 4th because then you'll run out of gas. Things like that. All around, it makes so that you're able to push that 1 lap pace, and you'll hear that language a lot. You'll hear a 1 lap pace and a race pace. You're able to push that 1 lap pace, but at race pace, it's going to be, a couple seconds slower. But even then, at the end of the race, for the fastest lap, Esteban Ocon had the slowest lap at 1:36. So he's still only at 1:36.2. So he was still like less than 4 seconds behind Max Verstappen, and he had the slowest lap. Now for the race results. Good news is that nobody got a DNF. So a DNF means did not finish, and it means if basically you crash out or you're unable to complete a certain amount of the laps, things like that, you get a DNF. And in real life, DNF, and I've beaten this horse a lot, in real life, DNF doesn't matter. No one cares if you DNF. As soon as you finish 11th, you don't get any championship points. As soon as you DNF, you don't get any championship points. And you'll see a lot of constructors and drivers in the bottom half of the field will rather take a DNF than risk damaging their car. For example, if I'm driving and for some reason my power unit, we call it an engine, they call it a power unit, starts to get a little warm or starts to, whatever, we think something's wrong with it, they will say, okay, Paul, you're done racing, retire the car, especially if I'm like driving 13th, because I'm not going to get any championship points anyway. So they're going to retire the car and do the repairs on it and start looking towards next weekend to not, rather than have me push a bad situation and still not finish with any championship points, but yet I trash an engine. So there's things like that you have to be considerate of, and it matters for us in fantasy world because we do get a huge penalty if somebody gets a DNF. If somebody gets a DNF, then we get negative 20 points, and which means that if somebody was driving really, really well and they were going to get, say, second place at like 19 or 21 points or whatever second place gets. And I just, honestly, I can actually look into it. How many points does second place get? I have it right here. So race position. So 25 for first, and it looks like 18 for second. Yeah. So second place gets 18. So what that means is that if I'm driving second place and let's say I qualified second place, this is going to be good. So where's qualification? Drivers, I'm looking at all the race position, qualifying position. So qualifying the first position gets 10 points. Qualifying the second position gets 9. So basically, if I qualify second, I get my 9 points, and I finish the race second, I get 18. 9 plus 18 is 27. But if I qualified first, get second, get 9 points, and then get a DNF, well, then I get negative 20, which means 9 plus or take away 20 gives you negative 11. So that is how big of a swing you can have if you take a DNF rather than finishing just how you started. And a lot of these, for us in fantasy Formula One world, it's really, really better to get a 0 than it is to get a DNF. But no one got a DNF, which is great. So coming in the back of the grid was, or back of the grid? No, yeah, the finishing grid, if you will. Logan Sargent, number 2 for Williams, my countryman, who I believe in, and he did a great job. He just had some mechanical issues with the car. He stayed out of the wall. There was one time he went off the track, and there was some sort of mechanical issue going on, but he was able to get it back on the track and finish 2 laps down. Valtteri Bottas with Kick Sauber, he finished 19. Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon with Alpine finished 18 and 17 respectively. And that's a far cry from where they want to be. It basically ended up them being a kind of an extended practice session. And to be transparent, that's what happened with Valtteri Bottas as well. I believe that was him at least. He had an over a minute-long pit stop because something went wrong with the gun or something went wrong with the tire or something like that. And I forget, but it just took a while, and that was the end of his race. Nico Hülkenberg for Haas finished 16th. Alex Albon finished with Williams finished 15th. Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo finished 13th and 14th. Now, this is a little bit of drama because Yuki Tsunoda, about 5 laps or whatever from the race, Yuki Tsunoda was in P13. Daniel Ricciardo was P14. Fine. Yuki Tsunoda had aged, I guess, medium or hard tires on. I think they were hards. He had aged hard tires on. Daniel Ricciardo had newer soft tires on. So Daniel Ricciardo was faster as they were both trying to pass Kevin Magnussen in his Haas. Well, Yuki Tsunoda wasn't getting the job done. He was about a half second behind, and the engineers came on over with team orders saying, Yuki Tsunoda, let Daniel Ricciardo pass you since he can go ahead and pass the Haas. And Yuki didn't want to do it. And he waited about a lap and a half or so before he finally let Daniel Ricciardo by. And then Daniel Ricciardo, for whatever reason, wasn't able to pass the Haas of Kevin Magnussen. I don't know if Kevin found the gas pedal or if Daniel Ricciardo's tires went out. But the from my perspective, from my armchair quarterbacking perspective, and from us as fantasy players' perspective, that is a little bit telling because it means that it might not all be, good in the baby RB world, but also Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo are both finishing up their contracts this year. So they're both fighting for that position. They're fighting for their spot on this team for next season already. And as soon as, you're with us, as soon as we're wanting to win and our boss comes over the radio and says, hey, you're being slow, let your other coworker go do it because you can't, I probably wouldn't take it that well either. Kevin Magnussen succeeded in defending Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda, finished 12th. Zhou Guanyu in his Kick Sauber finished 11th. Then Lance Stroll was P10 in Aston Martin, picking up 1 FIA championship point. Fernando Alonso finished 9, picking up 2. Oscar Piastri finished 8th with 4 points. And these points are the FIA global, world championship points. These aren't fantasy points. We'll talk about those in a second. Lewis Hamilton, 7th. Lando Norris, 6th, picking up 6 and 8 points, respectively. George Russell finished 5th, picking up 10 fantasy points. Charles Leclerc, picked up 12 points, finishing 4th. Carlos Sainz picked up 15 points, finishing 3rd. Then Sergio Perez, and then, as always, Max Verstappen picking up a handy 1-2. Big thing to take away from this, and this is pretty interesting, is Max Verstappen was, at the end of the race, 22 and a half seconds ahead of his teammate, ahead of second place Sergio Perez. Sergio Perez was 25 seconds ahead of Carlos Sainz's Ferrari. Sorry, no, never mind. I misread that. That would be really weird. Wow. So Max Verstappen finished 22 seconds ahead of Sergio Perez and 25 seconds ahead of Carlos Sainz and 39 seconds ahead of Charles Leclerc. So he was basically 40 seconds ahead of 4th. and Carlos Sainz was only 3.5 seconds back from Sergio Perez. So what do we take away from this? Max Verstappen is dominant like he was last year, and then that brings into the whole is he worth the money sort of thing, and we'll go there in a minute. So we didn't have a sprint. Drivers' points breakdown. All right. Alex Albon didn't get any points. Carlos Sainz got 36. Charles Leclerc got 22, and I'm doing this in alphabetical order off driver's first name. Daniel Ricciardo got 5. Esteban Ocon got 7. Fernando Alonso got 7. George Russell got 20. Kevin Magnussen got 7. Lance Stroll got 8. Lando Norris 16. Now that is not much for his Lando Norris. So Lando Norris got 16, but that's not much because he spent $23 million to have him on your team, and he got less points than, somebody who you spent less money on. So that's an issue. Lewis Hamilton, 12. Logan Sargent, 3. Max Verstappen, 45, which as soon as you don't pass somebody, 45 is about as good as you can get. And then that brings in the question, well, is it better to get a consistent 45, or would you rather have somebody who qualifies low, finishes high, and can get you 60? Well, no one did that this week, but it's still a thing to consider. Nico Hulkenberg had -3 points. Oscar Piastri had +10. Pierre Gasly had 6. Sergio Perez, 31. Valtteri Bottas had 0 points. Yuki Tsunoda had -1, which would have been 0 points if they hadn't asked, if the team orders hadn't told Daniel Ricciardo to pass him, and then Zhou Guanyu had 11 points. So and then for the constructor breakdown, Red Bull Racing had 89 points, and then Red Bull Racing had 89 points, Ferrari had 73, then Mercedes had 36, McLaren had 34, and then Alpine had 12, Haas had 9, Baby RB had 7, and Williams had 4. And I don't know if I said about Aston Martin had 20. And what does it matter? Well, Red Bull Racing gets, so if you take their total number of points and divide it by their cost, that will give you their points per million of dollar, right? Assuming the numbers you use are in the millions. Well, that means Red Bull all total had 3.19 points per $1 million they spent. So when you spend, basically triple the point, however much money you spend, you get triple that back in points from from Red Bull, which is good. For RB, you only get 0.83 back. So as soon as you spend $7 million or you spend $8 million to get Baby RB on your team, at least for this race, you're only getting 0.83 points back per million you spend, as opposed to a team like Red Bull that you get 3.19, or Ferrari you get 3.78. And why does that matter? Well, because first off, most of the constructors are in the 1.5 range, which is fine. Mercedes in the 1.5 range, McLaren's 1.5, Kick Sauber 1.5. So if Kick Sauber gets you 1.5 points per million, but McLaren only gets you 1.47, well, is it better to go for Kick Sauber? No, it's not, because McLaren costs, 5 times as much, so you get that points per million times 5. I say all that to say that Red Bull and Ferrari are the two ultra-dominant drivers that you can take any other two constructors, add together what they got, and you won't get either one of them. Nobody got DNF, so I can't talk about that. Year-to-date price changes. All right, so we're already in the prep mode here at the podcast for Bahrain this week, for Saudi Arabia this weekend. It's a high-speed track, so we can expect the higher speed cars to go a little bit better. But what about the money? So if you're wanting to change your team around, some drivers you're going to be paying more for. Some drivers and constructors you're going to be paying more for now. Some you're going to be paying less. If you want Alex Albon on your team, you're going to be paying $0.2 million less for him than you would have before Bahrain. Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc are $0.3 million more. Daniel Ricciardo is 0.1 less. Esteban Ocon is 0.5 million above. We're just going to call it 5 points above. Fernando Alonso is 1 point above where he was before. George Russell is 3 points or $0.3 million above where he was before. Kevin Magnussen and Lance Stroll are $500,000 above where they were before. Lando Norris, Lewis Hamilton are 0.1 above. Logan Sargent is -0.1. Max Verstappen is 0.2 up. Nico Hulkenberg's 2.2 down. Oscar Piastri's 0.1 up. Pierre Gasly is 0.1 down. And Sergio Perez is 0.3 million up. Valtteri Bottas, Yuki Tsunoda are 0.2 down, which I really don't think that's fair for Yuki. But and Zhou Guanyu is $500,000 up. Now, I would love, absolutely love, to be able to explain why Daniel Ricciardo got 5 points. Let me see. Let me get a really great example here of Okay. No, that's not a good example. It's not a good example either. Okay. George Russell. He got 20 points, and his value only went up 0.3. Zhou Guanyu got 11 points, and his value went up 0.5. That doesn't quite make sense, right? So Pierre Gasly got, Oscar Piastri, got 10 points, went up 0.1. Zhou Guanyu got 11 points and went up 0.5. And the reason why I think this is the more expensive the drivers are, the less they're going to get their prices adjusted. As soon as you have Zhou Guanyu, his performance is really, really good. You're getting over a 0.1 you're getting over a 1 point per million, so they're going to bring his value up to try and balance that out. With Logan Sargent, he got less than 1 point per million, right? It's moving down to try and balance that out. As soon as you have Max Verstappen, he got 45 points, cost $30 million. They're inking him up they're adding to that to try and get him closer to that average. The hole in my theory happens as soon as you look at Kevin Magnussen. No, actually that's pretty good. Both Kevin Magnussen got cost $6.7 million and got 7 points, and his value went up $500,000 after the race. Lance Stroll cost $11 million. He got 8 points. His value went up $500,000, and that's my guess is that occurred because he was in the top 10. Fernando Alonso, actually his value went up because he was in the top 10 as well. George Russell, I think I might rev real time crack the code here. Because, let me see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Carlos Sainz, Leclerc, Esteban Ocon, George Russell. No, because Kevin Magnussen. No, I don't get it. So Kevin Magnussen is the only one. Lance Stroll, Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, Oscar Piastri, Sergio Perez, Zhou Guanyu. See, now let me look back at those race results real quick. This is what you get when this is welcome to my mind, right? So Zhou Guanyu came in 11th, and his value went up. My initial theory was that their values go up if they're in the top 10, but Zhou Guanyu didn't, and his value went up $500,000. But also he got more points than a 1.0 point per million. So as soon as you got substantially, yes, true. I think that's it. Okay, yeah. Look, so Alex Albon got no points. He cost 6.8, which gave him a huge 0 points per million, and his value decreased by 0.2. Carlos Sainz got 36 points, cost 18 million. So he has well over a 1.0 point per million, and his value went up 0.3. Same as Charles Leclerc, 22 points, cost 19, got more points than millions of dollar value. His price went up. Daniel Ricciardo got 5 points, cost 8.9. So since he cost more than the points he got, he had less than a 1.0 point per million. His value went down. Now this is where my theory goes out the window a little bit because Esteban Ocon costs 15 million. He only got 7 points. Sorry, Esteban Ocon. Yeah, cost 8 million, only got 7 points, and his value went up $500,000. So let's see, where did Ocon finish? That's see, and I don't get it. He finished 17th. I do not understand why Esteban Ocon finishes 17th, gets half a point a million, and his value jumps. I don't get it, and he was Alpine, and so yeah, there's Alpine. Where's the other Alpine at? Pierre Gasly. See, and then Pierre Gasly gets 6 points, costs $7.7 million, and goes down. I don't understand it. I guess there's not a reason why, but yeah, all the prices fluctuate. The only drivers to go down in value are Yuki Tsunoda, Valtteri Bottas, which really wasn't his fault, Pierre Gasly, Nico Hulkenberg, Logan Sargent, but hey, he's still finishing the positive points, so I'm keeping him on one of my teams. Daniel Ricciardo and Alex Albon. Why does this matter for us in the fantasy Formula One world? Well, this shows that drivers' values, for the most part, are increasing. So as soon as you could barely afford to have Max Verstappen on your team last week, you might not be able to afford it this week. And if you wanted Lance Stroll on your team early in the year, then you got it, but now he's $500,000 more, and especially if he goes up another $500,000 after Saudi Arabia, then you might not be able to get him on your team. So if you have guys you like, you need to buy high and hang on to them and hope and keep them. Otherwise, it seems like this fantasy Formula One year is basically going to start pricing people out of what it's going to make it so you can't do a lot of fast trading like we could last year. How about that? It means that if you miss the wagon, assume Kevin Magnussen is going to be worth $10 million by the end of the year, and you won't even be able to get a Haas driver. And then let's go look at the constructors real quick. So for Alpine, their value went down as a constructor by 0.1. Aston Martin went up by 0.5. Fine. Ferrari went up by 0.3. Haas and Kicksauber both went down by 0.1. McLaren and Mercedes both went up by 0.1. RB went up. RB stayed neutral because I think they're just like us, right? Like they're trying to figure out what's going on with RB, and because I'm expecting nothing like. Okay, how about this? The sky's the limit with RB. You have Max Verstappen, you have Yuki Tsunoda. But Yuki Tsunoda put up 0.8 points per million last year. He did very well. Broke my heart a few times, but did great. And you have, Daniel Ricciardo, who is a multi-Grand Prix winner with three other teams, and raced with three other teams, and even raced with Red Bull at one point. So he has the pedigree, he has the capability. The question is if they can take a team like, AlphaTauri and just rebrand it, get new people in there, and actually get them performing like a baby Red Bull. Bunch of question marks. If you're asking me for advice, I would say it's just not saying it's too early to say, but I would say based on the trends, be very leery, be very careful of Mercedes. They did great in practice. They didn't qualify. It seems like if you're wanting the points, you need to have Red Bull as a constructor, you need to have Ferrari as a constructor, or you need to have some combination of both. And then keep them as a constructor, and on the specific races, when you use your 2X and your 3X, when you use your DRS token, you'll need to shift it around so you have enough drivers to use both of your 3X and your 2X chipset. But I don't know. I'm waiting for Aston Martin to impress me. I'm waiting for Baby RB to impress me. And I'm, at least after only a sample size of one, Max Verstappen, Red Bull, and Ferrari really seem like the way to go, and everything else is just mitigating your losses. Kicksauber did fine. Haas did fine. Alpine, I don't think they're worth it because they have a lot of issues coming up, and if you're going to get, two drivers that can get you 6 points each, well, you don't need to spend $7-9 million with them on Alpine. You can just go to Haas and get the exact same thing. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this Bahrain by the numbers. We will see you next week as we talk about Saudi Arabia, and we will also do another Saudi Arabia by the numbers. Cheers.